Hey guys, it's Robin, RsIslandCrafts. As part of my goal to make sure I don't have as many UFOs, unfinished objects, by the end of 2018, I'd already finished my January UFO, which was the butterfly quilt that some of you may have seen. It's hanging on the wall behind me when I tape. I decided to pull out one of my second 12 because I have an original 12 that I'm doing, then 12 bonus. Anyway, this is the quilt that I'm working on. This is going to be a nice little pastel baby quilt, wall hanging for that baby's room or something like that. It's not a very large one because I only have a few blocks. But as I was working on that, I thought we would discuss how to nest seams. That's like a bird's nest, N-E-S-T, and then the seams. And when you nest seams, it allows you to have all your intersections come together. So while I'm putting this together, I thought, well, let me just show you guys how I nest seams, because sometimes when I watch it in a video, they'll tell you, oh, you need to nest your seams, and then they'll go, this is how you do it. And I'm like, whoa, 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 I have no clue what you're talking about. But over time, numerous videos and blog reading, I figured it out. So I thought I'd save you a few steps, and for anyone who doesn't already know how to nest seams, we'll talk about it today. Now you might say, oh, hold on there a minute, Robin. I'm not going to make quilts. I'm a bag maker. But when you're making bags, if you want to have two different colors, it's still good to know how to nest seams, so when they come together on the side, you don't have them too crooked. So sometimes our knowledge will cross over from one craft to another, even though they're all sewing. So let me show you what I mean by nesting seams. These are my final two rows for my quilt, row 4 and row 5. Basically, it's going to be a 5-row quilt by 5 squares. So when we're going to nest our seams, we're going to take our 2 rows, and I'm going to take the bottom one and just flip it up to the top here. See if I can... Okay, now when I ironed one row, I ironed one row to the right, and on the previous row, I ironed everything to the left. That way, when the seams meet, there's not going to be a lot of extra bulk there. And nesting seams is just, you hold the 2 of them together, and you're going to have the seam allowance on one side, on the right, and on the other on the left. And when you kind of do this with your fingers, you can feel them just settle in together, and it like nests right into place. I'm not sure why they call it nesting. But as I'm doing this, both of my seams are just lining up perfectly and falling into place. So if I were to open it up, the seams would be right together like this. So what I like to do, some people just put one pin in right here to hold the seam and maybe on a diagonal. I like to use 2 pins. I like to put one right on one side of the seam, and then I like to put the second one right on the other side. That way I know that seam is staying together and it's not moving at all. So let's try another one. See, on this one we have on the top one, our seam allowance is going to the right, and on the bottom it's going to the left. I just kind of line them up, kind of rub it with my fingers, and then they nest together. I haven't tried using the clover clips on this. Sometimes I wonder if they're not not permanent, but I feel like the pins hold it in place better than the clips, and the clips could get knocked out easier than the pins would. Okay, so then all I would do is I would take this to the sewing machine and I would stitch along, and when I got close to the pins, I would just go ahead and pull out a pin, make sure that my seam is still together, still nested, and then just keep going a little bit. And once you hit the first bit of seam allowance here from the bottom that you can't see, it's going to hold your seam. But once I hit the second one, then I'll go ahead and pull out this pin. And then if you have a little bit of extra, like your squares weren't quite perfect, so maybe this one had a little bit of extra fabric on top, you can always give it just a little bit of a tug. Now, none of these are on the bias, so they're really tight, but sometimes if it's a little bit stretchier fabric, you can let your machine hold it a little and it will suck in that extra fabric. You're not going to be able to do it if you have like a half an inch of fabric, but if you have just a smidge, just a little eighth of an inch, it'll pick it up. You don't want the extra fabric to ever end up where your seams are, because then when you open it up, they're not going to match. And it doesn't matter to me whether I used to never pin, because I can just hold it with my fingers and I can nest it each time we go. But a lot of the times my intersections just weren't matching up and my points weren't matching up. So I've decided I have to suck it up and be a big girl, and I have to put pins in on each intersection, whether that's just using one intersection with 2 pins or whether I have 20 intersections. It's just going to give you a better final product, and it's going to make you happier. Now, as we look at the little quilt I have here, you may notice I did not get this seam perfect. Like, this one here is really nice, and you'll notice I got everything to line up. This one is just a little bit off there, and it's just not lining up perfectly. Now, I could choose to go ahead and rip that out and take it back, but this little bit is not going to bother me that much. For the type of quilt that this is, if it was a bunch of half square triangles or a bunch of points and everything, I might be a little more concerned. And if it was a larger difference than this, then I might pay more attention. But apparently when I put my pins in, I wasn't quite paying enough attention, and I didn't get my seams to nest properly. Because if you put them together, I mean, obviously you can see now, but when you put them together, they're just off just by that little smidge. It's very frustrating, but overall, for just having a little bit off, one of these squares must not be just perfect, and like I said, I just didn't take enough care. But you have to decide, every quilter has to decide how much you're willing to put up with and how much you need to be perfect. Now for this one, I could probably take back the seam to here and line this back up and get it perfect. But you have to do more than just through this little intersection. If you only do this little bit, it's not going to be enough for you to ease in any type of extra fabric that there might be. And as I'm looking at it, I think I see where my problem might have been. If you see here, I didn't start my rows exactly even. So even if I had my spots pinned in place, it's like building a house. If as you're putting up the walls, if it's off by just a little eighth of an inch, by the time you get to the end of the wall, you could be off by 2.5 inches. It's the same thing as a quilt. It just kind of like a snowball effect. What starts as a little bit here will just keep adding up until you get down to here, and now you're off by this eighth of an inch. But the purpose of this quilt and what it's going to be used for, it'll be perfectly fine. And like a lot of things they say, I can quilt that out. Once I put all the quilting on it, it probably won't even be noticed. Because I like to use the cotton batting, and if I quilt it enough, when you wash it, it gets all crinkly, and a lot of these little things like this will disappear. But that's nesting seams. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and leave a comment down below. And I'd love to have comments with you guys. I really enjoyed discussing things with you down in the comments. If you like this video, please go ahead and like it. And then if you want to see more like this, please subscribe. Liking it and subscribing it lets YouTube know, hey, I like this kind of content. And other people who are looking for something similar, they'll recommend it and suggest it to them. And then we have more people to chat with. Thanks for hanging out with me in my sewing room. Bye!